Hello and welcome back to Marine for TCG. My name is Joe. Drink of the day is quite mediocre, and today I want to talk about OP16.5 because I think whilst these starter decks aren't going to completely change the meta, I think there are a number of potential top contenders, as well as some shake-ups to some of the existing top decks potentially falling down a little bit. And starting off, I want to fill in my top tier because then we can talk about the rest of the list in relation to that. So my top tier contains Mihawk, Luffy, Enel, Goofy, and Teach. I think all of these decks are going to be very, very good. Nami I've actually got dropping down from GOATs to Great. Nami's indisputably top tier last format. But I think with Mihawk being an incredibly popular deck now, that's going to be difficult for Nami. Teach was already a reasonably difficult matchup for Nami. Goofy, I've heard many different opinions on. I think at the top level, people generally think slightly Goofy favoured. And regular Luffy is going to be gaining points in that matchup just because it's a much better deck now. And that 7-cost red Luffy being another 9k body can make Nami's life a little bit difficult. So for that reason, I do have Nami dropping down. I think Mihawk in particular is going to be a very difficult matchup now. That Lord Beppo is so good, along with Electrical Luna, stunning. A lot of their early game stuff. Among these top decks, I'd probably rank them something like this. I think Teach is the most sort of dodge and weave deck, in that your Goofy matchup is still quite difficult. But also additionally, I think the Mihawk matchup now can be pretty difficult as well, with them being able to double summon, slow you down with the Odin, and then Lord Beppo your 10 costs in the late game. I think that matchup is likely to be one that can be quite tricky for Teach alongside Goofy, so I'd probably put him in 5th. But I do think you are still one of the best decks into Enel, and you are like Red-Green Luffy's worst matchup by a mile. Turning off his leader effect just effectively shuts down the entire deck. Luffy can win, but he needs to really, really high roll, and kind of hope Teach whiffs a little bit to get the job done a lot of the time. So Teach, I think, is probably a bit more of a risky pick, depending on your local meta. If there's lots of RG and Enel, Teach is going to be a great pick. But if there's lots of Goofy and Mihawk, it can be a little more tricky. Goofy, I think, is going to, of course, still struggle with Enel, but also struggle with RG Luffy. That deck's able to be so aggressively defensive. That makes no fucking sense whatsoever. But RG Luffy has so much counter to get out of Goofy's early aggression. And then the stun events, whether it's I Know You're Strong or especially Electrical Luna, are of course very, very good into Goofy, as well as becoming a 7k leader. It's something they've got to overcome, right? They can obviously do it, but when you've got sort of 4 Don active and you're a 7k leader, it's hard to pressure through that. So I think these two are going to be tougher matchups for Goofy, but you still have a great time into Teach. And I think you're going to have a slightly favoured matchup into Mihawk. Mihawk's early game is not good enough to deal with Goofy stuff all of the time. We do have answers. The 1-cost Apu, as well as the new 1-cost Zoro, can be pretty nice for that matchup. But you got to find them. And I suppose if you want to tech for this matchup, you could tech in the 4-cost Rayleigh. It's able to rest 2 characters and then has character rush. That would be a nice little tech, but I don't know how many Mihawk players are going to be playing that one, to be honest. It's not been in most of the lists I've seen. RG Luffy just gets a huge power buff from this set. The boat effectively gives you an extra Don every single turn, as well as some nice consistency. And the 7-cost Luffy makes it easier to target down rested characters. Like, you can actually clear Enels now. Which in the past, those Enels just kind of stuck there and you had to freeze them with Luna or Strong. But being able to play out that 7-cost Luffy to reduce the power of the Enels gives you an out to remove them. I do still think the Enel matchup is going to be reasonably difficult. You cannot protect against their removal with Laboon because they can Mumaragan it. And then Gamma Knife plus L4 is very, very powerful at removing pretty much everything that you play. But I do think being a 7k leader is very nice into Enel, and that Luffy making it so that you can actually remove this, as well as the general power buff, is going to make this matchup a lot closer than it was before. So with that not being bad, I think your Mihawk matchup is going to be very fine. I think this is going to be quite a tricky matchup for both players to play. The 7-cost Luffy is, of course, very good at removing their top end, be it a Lord Beppo or a 9-cost Mihawk. 9-cost Mihawk is incredibly risky to play in this matchup now, because it will just get ganked by the Luffy. So I think RG Luffy, again, is going to have a generally better matchups across the board. You've just got to not see too many teachers, because that matchup sucks. Mihawk, now that you've got the Odin, your Enel matchup is so much more playable than it was before. Being able to stun the Enels whilst drawing cards is just incredible. We didn't have a really good option to play into Enel before. The Prona can't hit Enel. Some of the Bonnies could be pretty good for just generating value. And then we used to play the 5-cost Tashigi that could rest the Enel to then stun it with an event. But obviously Vari plays around that, and Odin hits base cost. It just kind of not fixes this matchup. It's still pretty reasonably close, but it makes this matchup so much more playable for Mihawk. Being able to double develop while stunning their biggest guy is just great. I think also of these decks, there's nothing here that you're like super scared of. I think the Goofy matchup can be a little tricky, and RG Luffy I think is also can be a little difficult, but it's close for both decks, I would think. But there's none of these decks where your opponent flips over your leader and you're upset, whereas with all of these other decks, there is one where your opponent flips their leader over and you're upset. If you're playing Teach, you don't want to see Goofy. If you're playing RG, you do not want to see Teach. If you're Enel, you also don't want to see Teach. And if you're Goofy, you don't want to see Enel. So I think Mihawk, a lot of people gravitate towards him because his matchups are sort of a lot closer across the board. Nothing super winning, but nothing super losing either. That's the impression I have at this point. Now moving on to the leaders from the new starter decks. I think these are a mixed bag. I think ST21 Luffy is probably still going to be top of Rogue. I think the Straw Hat package does help him a lot, but the deck still has just some power level issues in that the leader effect is just not that good. It's okay, but maybe you could push him up to the bottom of solid. I don't know. I think it's between these two for ST21. I'm going to put him top of Rogue for now. But I do think people will play this deck. I think it's much, much improved from the new cards from the deck. I think you're generally just a lot weaker than these top decks still. Amusingly, Sabo, what a roller coaster, right? Sabo's starter deck is kind of dog shit. There's some stuff you can do. I think the Kuma is actually not that bad. That 7-cost Koala's like really underwhelming. But I think the Sabo, I think I'm going to put Sabo in at least solid because he's stolen ST21's deck. He looked at his own deck and was like, damn, this shit stinks. And looked at the Sanji from this deck and went, ooh, is for me. So yeah, the Straw Hat Sabo build that's been it's been very talked about online recently. I've played a little bit. It feels very high rolly, but it's quite consistent in getting that high roll. Obviously, in the games where you don't find your pirate docking in time, or don't find enough events or whatever, or don't find the 4-cost Luffy, it's a lot weaker. But I think this build is at least deserving of solid, because the high roll is genuinely very scary for pretty much anything across the board. If you are a deck that can deal with the pirate docking, something like a Nell going Gamma Knife L4, that's when Sabo kind of struggles, because this deck doesn't play many 8-cost characters anymore. It's really only that pirate docking and then sometimes a couple copies of the 4-cost Sabo. So I think decks like a Nell and other purple decks like maybe Rose and Ante will be ones that might be quite difficult for you still to deal with. But this deck is no doubt incredibly explosive. I just have some concerns about the consistency still. Katakuri I'm actually going to put in great, and this might be a little bit of coping. I think that 10 mum as well as the 5 cat help this deck out a lot. You have a deceptive amount of card draw with Katakuri because of the 7-cost pudding as well as your leader effect, buying you out of swings on certain turns just like Shanks used to. And the 10-cost mum really helps you deal with top-end stuff. Going 10 mum plus Mum Muragan is just amazing for clearing big teachers, Lord Beppos, even Enel's, although I do think Enel is probably your toughest matchup. They are very good at dealing with your stuff through Gamma Knife L4, even when it's upright. But like your board being restood by the 8-cost Katakuris is great into Red Green Luffy and Mihawk. They can't Luna your ass. And they also can't then combat your board, so they're forced to attack into your life. And then the 10 mum is again great for dealing with their stuff. Even removing a 7-cost Zoro whilst healing, it just feels very, very strong doing that with 10 mum. I do think your Goofy matchup is still quite difficult. They're very, very aggressive, and we don't have the best ways to answer them. The 4-cost Cracker helps a little bit, being able to pop 1-2, but I still think that is tough, and I think Enel is a very tough matchup. The fact that they're always below the requisite amount of Don for your 2-cat and your 7-cost Pudding to have to fire means that a lot of your deck just doesn't really work into Enel, which is tricky. And also the fact that they are equipped quite well to deal with your 8-cost Katakuris, whereas a lot of these other decks can't really deal with them. Certainly not as easily. Another nice note is into Mihawk, because your entire board restands if you've got enough Katakuris on the board. They often can't lure Beppo and go to 7, because you're not necessarily going to have something rested already for them to then rest something else and get the buff, which is pretty huge, honestly. I think Katakuri does still have some issues, like I say, in the UG matchup and the Enel matchup being quite difficult. And whiffing 5-cost Katakuri still feels really bad. But we do have 2.5 searches now. And the half is the Brule that's actually top 3. So you should be pretty damn consistent at getting your curve off. It's just, I think sometimes the early aggression can be quite tricky. Kuzan, I'm going to put in the top of solid. I think he's a good deck, and you could maybe put this at the bottom of great. I think he's just a little bit too fair still. Or being able to play out your Sakazukis and Aramakis a turn early feels very strong, but these aren't cards with huge payoffs. They're just very fair. Nothing this deck does feels super broken. The closest you come to that is going Ice Time plus Galdino. That does feel very obnoxious, but you've got to get there first. You've got to see your curve. You can't whiff anything. And we don't have the most searches in the world. We're pretty consistent, but there are games where you whiff your 6-cost Garp. There are games where you whiff your 8-cost Garp. And that's when it becomes a lot more difficult, as well as some of the decks that can deal with your stuff efficiently. Again, like Nell, being able to go Gamma Knife Elforge to remove one of your bodies, like your Sakazuki, for example, can be quite frustrating. I think if you are able to establish a board, this deck is very, very strong. And the Teach matchup is one that I quite like, because you're able to go very wide. As well as now we've got quite a lot of tools for dealing with UG Luffy's early game. Although they can still get there in the late game. But between the 2-cost Smoker, the Aramaki, and Raging Tiger, we have a lot of removal to deal with this deck. And Raging Tiger is also kind of the all-star into RG, as long as they don't have Laboon. Unfortunately, unlike Enel, we can't rest Laboon. So it's just kind of there. If they get it, then our removal doesn't work anymore, which is quite tricky. I do think Kuzan's good. I think it's much, much improved from the starter deck. Mainly that 6-cost Garp is the hugest buff. But I still think he's just a little too fair to put higher. Green Zoro I'll put in Rogue. I think this deck, I mean, this is the meme, right? It's a Mihawk starter deck. Zoro really doesn't gain that much from this starter deck. The 6-cost Mihawk is a minor upgrade on lore, or like side grade, and the Odin doesn't help this deck anywhere near as much as Mihawk, because it doesn't interact with your leader effect at all. It denies a swing, but that's all it does. So I don't think this deck is actually that much improved. A little bit. The Mihawk's quite nice. Being able to go Mihawk to Shigi's cool, and the 1-cost Zoro is cool, but it just feels very linear, this deck. And with some of the effects that we have now, like Teach's redirects, being able to deny your leader effect is pretty annoying. Enel's are just enormous, and they can just remove all your shit immediately. And with RG Luffy having so much defense now, as well as all the annoying healing and on KOs just in yellow generically, I don't have that high hopes for Zoro. I have slightly high hopes for Kid. I'd probably put him about here. I think this deck actually gets some nice buffs, and I'd maybe even put him above Straw Hat Sabo, but I think that's probably my Kid Cope talking a little bit too much, so I'll leave him below Sabo. I think Life Trash is strong into a lot of decks. Obviously into Teach, denying their triggers is crazy. But also into RG Luffy, being able to burn through those resources with 8-cost Kids. They can deal with your board pretty easily now that they've got that red Luffy. But being able to trash their lives, even if you're on like turns where you wouldn't be able to deal damage, does feel very good. and it does take resources off them. You've just got to be careful that you develop board as well, because if you don't develop enough board and they're able to clear what you do play, it can get very, very difficult to actually close out the game. I think Kid gains a few things from this set. The 6-cost Kid is great, and the Killer is an insane card. I just think the leader effect is a little underwhelming, especially compared to some of these. If I was being purely my opinion, I would put him above Sabo, but I've already seen Sabo doing alright online, and I've not seen much from Kid. I hope Kid does a little better, but Solid is a decent placement already for a deck that I probably wouldn't have even put in Rogue last. Now moving on to the rest of the decks, we'll go through most of these a little bit quicker. I think Odin gains a couple nice things from the starter deck. The Mihawk and the Odin are pretty cool, but I still don't really see too much reason to play this leader. He's getting some nice new stuff in OP17 though, so that's pretty cool to see. GP Luffy as well, I think this deck's fine. It's probably better than these. It's not really gained anything. It's not really lost anything. Enel is still a tricky matchup. And if you don't see your Sanji Pudding, you instantly fall over. So, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this deck. It can be fun to play, but it's so reliant on one card that it's not one I'm a huge fan of. VV I'd put in locals. It's fine. It's gained nothing. This can use the Straw Hat package from the SC21 deck, but it does it like way worse than all the other Cope decks that are using it, because the 5-cost VV doesn't let you play characters after you summon the one off its effect. So you can't go like VV Luffy, Sanji, Nami or something silly. You can't do that. Regular Bonnie and Roger I'll put here. Both of these decks kind of just do the same thing. They sit at 9k for the entire game. I've seen the other builds of Bonnie. I've seen there's a removal build, and I've also seen there's just like a trigger build that plays 1,000,000 draw 2s and, I don't know, just like kind of sits there. I don't think any of them are very good, to be honest. I don't rate this leader highly. I think the best thing you can be doing is going to 9k, and I just don't think that is versatile enough, especially now that Mihawk can tap down your Luffys and just keep them frozen. It's pretty frustrating. Yellow and L can go in Rogue. I'm probably not going to order this Rogue list too tightly. I've not played with most of these decks in this format. There's only so much time in the day. But Yellow and L's still fine. I'll put him above these. It's just fine. I think there's other yellow decks that do what he does better at this point. Yamato I'm going to put in locals. I've seen a few people coping on this again with the new Odin. It's fine. I think this deck's really, really dated. If you can deal with double attack, either by taking it and then just sitting at a low life count with 1,000,000 counters, or by redirecting, or just countering the one big swing a turn, this leader doesn't really have a lot to say. I'm not a fan of Yamato. Bonnie, I think, is just worse Mihawk. The only reason you'd play this is if this is your favourite character, I feel at this point. And now that we're getting Shanks in OP17, I think this is likely to probably see very little to no play at all once 17 comes out. Marco, I'll put in Rogue. I think this is a little underrated. Power-based removal is actually very strong at the minute. We've seen that with all the purple stuff. Marco is a power-based removal deck. He's quite a flimsy one, only having 4 life and not a ton of card advantage. But I do think he's at least worthy. We've seen how good power-based removal can be at the moment. Calgara, I think, should be at least solid. I forgot to rank this guy last time, which was crazy. Cause this was definitely a solid deck last set. I don't know if I'd quite put him in great, but losing or less Nami representation is going to be great for Calgara. You've got a pretty reasonable Luffy matchup. Your Enel matchup's playable. I can see RG being pretty tough to deal with, though. Between them being able to go to 7, just leave 1,000,000 counters open, and Electrical Luna being awful to deal with, I can see RG being tough. Mihawk's one of them where if you can beat them down fast enough, that should be an okay matchup. But if they get to their late game and start lunaring your ass, you're going to be pretty upset about it. So I'd put him in solid. I think this is a fine aggro deck. If you want to play yellow but don't want to play Trigger, it's the Trigger man. Red Shanks will move you down to Rogue. The Beckman was not nearly as good as I thought it was going to be. Shanks saw a little bit of minor success at the odd regionals. You get the odd top 64 and such, but He didn't do very well last set, and I don't think much is going to change this set. Nami wasn't a particularly good or bad matchup, and with everything else just getting stronger, I think we're waiting for green Shanks among the Shanks. But he's still pretty decent. That Beckman's an insane card. Just everything else is super fair. Lim, I'm going to put in locals. I don't have anything to say on this. It's fine. You can ramp to 10 mum. It's kind of cute. And then you can maybe use your leader Frank to ramp back a little bit after your 10 mum. But yeah, I don't think much else. Pudding, I'm also going to put in rogue. I'll put her above these, I guess. The 10 mum's nice. It gives you an actual thing to ramp to. And I think once we get those Kaidos and maybe even some of the yellow Big Mum stuff from next set, it'll be interesting to see how Pudding does with all those new buffs. But for now, I don't think the 10 cost mum helps enough for me to put her anywhere near as high as Katakuri. This lead effect is just very underwhelming. It's just ramp. Blackbeard's always a rogue deck. If the on-plays get too crazy, Blackbeard comes out and spoils the fun. If you want your opponents to not like you at locals, you could consider playing this deck. I'm a notorious Blackbeard hater. I can't even remember the last time I lost to this deck. Like, every time I play him on the ladder now, I beat his ass. But when I build a deck wanting to do things. And this deck says you can't do anything. Unless you're playing like a Rush red aggro deck. Which is why I don't like this leader. I think this leader is very anti-One Piece. He's very anti-fun. In a way that is even more so than the yellow decks that people complain about. A yellow deck can be frustrating. But this deck is just anti-fun. However, his strategies can be effective if you are scared of some really big combos. I mean, imagine you're playing against Red-Black Sabo with the Straw Hat build. And then you say, no one plays. And they're like, what now? My stuff doesn't do anything. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. If you're sick of the Straw Hat slot, you can bring out Blackbeard. Yeah, I'll put him in Rogue for now. Red-Green Smoker, I'm going to put right at the bottom of Rogue. This is definitely my Cope, being a Navy enthusiast. I think this deck does gain from that Green Star deck. Both the Odin and the Mihawk are cool. And I think it's underexplored as well. Very interesting effects, combination of effects on this leader. And I do think Red-Green Smoker has some potential, but probably won't be explored enough to be any higher. Realizing I'm going off the page. Let's zoom out a little bit. There we go. That'll do. That'll do, donkey. Green Yellow Law again. I'm gonna put. Oh, I picked up Kobe. Green Yellow Law I'm gonna put in locals. I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, I lied. I'm gonna put him up here. I think again, both the yellow and green Starlex help this guy out a little bit. Nothing too crazy. I think he's still kind of misses the old cards that got rotated, right? The 5-cost blocker law and the 5-cost restand law were both very integral parts of this guy's deck. And losing those with no good replacement just yet is a bit of a shame, but some nice buffs from the starter deck. Both the 6-cost Kid and the Mihawk primarily, but maybe also the Odin. The Odin's cute. I think that Odin's just a crazy card for every green deck, except like this guy and this guy. Damn, why are there 2 green Luffy leaders that are archetype locked? Is green Luffy canonically racist? Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, Red-Black Kobe, I'd actually put him in solid. I love this deck, and I underrated it last set. This deck saw quite a number of tops. There was one regional where someone went 10-0 with it, which is crazy. We had another, you know, a few top 32s and higher in this format. And what was it, second place at one of the regionals? Or was it first? I can't remember if they won the final or not, but yeah, it had some crazy performances, and Nami dropping off in play rate is going to be helpful for this deck, because I think Nami is a very difficult matchup for Kobe, at least in my experience. Maybe I'm just not good at that matchup, but Enel's still there. Enel is still tough, but being able to power down these guys' characters should be pretty reasonable. Although Electrical Luna, like, fucks this deck. So, I don't know if he'll get better or worse overall, but I think he's probably good enough for at least solid. Blue-purple Luffy, we'll put him in Rogue. I'll put him around here. It's fine. You don't really gain anything from these starter decks. You're not playing 10 month. You're not playing 5 cat. You're not playing any of the Navy shit. But yeah, it's fine. It's a fine deck. In extra grand battles, this is significantly better because you have Red Rock and Mihawk. Rayleigh's a decent aggro deck. We'll put him in Rogue. I think you're always just better off playing this. And his package, his full cost Luffy, has been stolen by a bunch of posers. There's also people playing it in Bonnie. The Straw Hat stuff. I've seen it in Bonnie. I've seen it in Nami. I've seen it in Sabo. I've seen it in... I've not seen it in RG Luffy, actually. That's a lie. I've seen it in Luffy and Ace, though. I think Sabo is the best abuser of that package. But yeah, Rayleigh can't actually use it because the Sanji's a 5 cost. What a treat. Yeah, I think Rogue is fine for Rayleigh. And I think Rogue is also fine for UP Sanji. I saw a Nightingale video on whether OP17, the Kaidos, could help this deck. I don't think the Big Mum will, but maybe. Maybe you could try the Big Mum out in this one. I don't know, having 0 done up really scares me, because you rely so heavily on counter events. So I'm not sure about that one. I'll leave him in Rogue for now. Having unfettered access to Raging Tiger, though, quite underrated in this format. A lot of decks up here do not appreciate Raging Tiger. Rosnante I'll put bottom of grey. I think this deck is still very strong, but if there is more Luna in the format, that sucks for Rosie. Especially when it's Nami Luna from RG Luffy. Being able to rest down those like Sakazuki's or Rosnante Laws proactively and then keeping them frozen is very tough to deal with. And having all that counter is also quite frustrating for Rosie, who wants to play sort of deceptively aggressively, at least in the early game. So I do think the increase of green could be quite difficult, as well as a Nell still being a bad matchup. Ace has gained nothing, but is probably still pretty good. I've not run into anyone playing this deck yet in OP16.5, I'll be honest. So I don't have too much experience with this one. But I'm going to put him in great. The deck's still probably fine. Mihawk, though, was a very difficult matchup in the past. That was one of your worst that you didn't want to see. And RG Luffy now being able to deal with the Whitebeard through that 7-cost Luffy could also be pretty tricky. So maybe he's not in great anymore. Maybe he's in the top of solid. I can see both those green decks being pretty tricky. And Nell wasn't super good already. I think Teach was quite tough as well. Maybe I'll move him down just one row. If you are an Ace enthusiast and you've got experience playing into these decks in OP16.5, though, and you think he's better than this, please do let me know, because I'm not confident in this one at all. Emu's fine. It's a rogue deck. It can get annihilated by Mama Argan. They can just wrestle your blockers and shoot you through that. And it already wasn't having a very good time in OP16. So I don't think too much has changed for Emu. From OP16, Burrow I'd put in solid still. Your Teach matchup's pretty bad if they are a good player and know to just starve you and then turn your leader effect off with 10-cost Teach, so then they can clear your board very easily. And you won't draw cards when you get triggers. And also Luna is pretty rough for this deck. All these green decks are able to play it. I've seen a lot of builds not playing Luna, which, if these decks don't end up like always playing Luna, decks like Rosnante and Boa are going to get a little bit stronger. And the fall off of Nami will be good for Boa, because that was a very tough matchup. But I do think overall Boa is still going to struggle a little bit with the aggression from Luffy, the stun from these, and then Teach just is kind of a natural counter. Doflamingo is kind of just bad Teach. He has some unique traits which are pretty cool. Being able to stun with the 10-cost Dofi is cute, but I don't think it's any higher than solid. And like right at the bottom of solid. Jinbei I'm going to put with Rayleigh. These are two flavors of the same deck, both very aggressive. Jinbei has a lot more removal, which is actually quite solid into some of these decks up here. But Rayleigh has a lot more card advantage, so pick your poison. I'll put them both in Rogue for now. Crocodile was underwhelming last set. It's a deck I expected a little more from, but we didn't quite get there. I'm going to put him in the middle of solid. I still do think the package is good, and Japan now has the live action promos, so I'm quite interested to see if any of those live action promos meaningfully buff this deck. I haven't looked into them enough to say myself. I remember the Missile Sunday, I think, being one that was interesting, but I can't remember what the hell it does. We're not getting them for another, like, 4 months. It's November, right? We're getting them? Crazy. So, yeah, I haven't looked into those live actions too deeply. But Crocodile's always fine. The 8 cost is cool. It can't be killed. And you can develop a nice wide board through the Missile Sunday. You just can't whiff. You whiff Missile Sunday, you're very sad. You whiff Crocodile, it's over. So the deck still has some consistency issues. You only have a top 4 and a top 3. Is it? So yeah, I think Solid is fine. Moria is Rogue. This is a fine deck to play. I think I'd probably put it below some of these. Put it... I don't know. Well, I'll put him with a Nell. There's just better the yellow decks. There's so many better yellow decks at this point. He wasn't that great in OP14. And he's certainly outclassed now by every yellow deck above him. Krieg. This is me coping a lot. Maybe. I think Krieg could be solid. Maybe. A Nell matchup is utter wank. You immediately fall over to a Nell. But your Goofy matchup was good. Your Teach matchup was playable. Mihawk going to 6k will probably be pretty tough. I haven't played Krieg yet this format. Mihawk going to 6k will probably be pretty tough, but you do have good power reduction with the Krieg to try and deal with his board. And you can mostly swing for 6s anyway with all the free dons you get. He will be able to slow you down with the Odin, but I can see it being a difficult matchup. Luffy, again, I think you're going to struggle to get through his counter. They have so much defense. It's tricky to deal with. Maybe I'll move him down a bit. I'm going to put him back where he belongs. I think these are probably both going to be reasonably tricky matchups. Alongside a Nell just also being horrific. So yeah, I'll put him in Rogue. Maybe if you're a Krieg main and I'm wrong on RG Luffy or Mihawk, let me know. But Mihawk just tends to do very well into other Slash leaders because of the funny line of text. And RG Luffy, I can see just having too much counter. Because you have to battle for board. And RG Luffy's going to counteract that with the amount of extra dons he has. But I don't know. I guess you can attach some of them with the green stuff. But the red stuff doesn't help with that. Maybe if you can get enough green boys going. With like the Arlong, it's able to attach active don. As well as the Kuro. Can do active don, right? Maybe that would be good enough. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm going to leave him in Rogue. I'm going to put Lucy at the bottom of Great. You lose one of your better matchups in Nami. And Nell is still going to be very prevalent and is a tough matchup. You do still have a good matchup into Teach, but you also have a tough matchup into Goofy. These new decks, typically when I've played Mihawk in the past, I've loved seeing Lucy's because of the power of Electrical Luna, being able to stun them out of the game. And Luffy having access to Laboon will negate their removal, but obviously you do have to find it. And Laboon is unsearchable for this deck. So if they don't see Laboon, you're going to be able to do a lot more removal with Lucy, which could be pretty good. But again, this is a deck that can play Electrical Luna. And if these Luna decks can chain Lunas, or even just I know your Strongs into Lucy is usually enough, your Sabos just never stand up. And that's quite difficult to deal with. So I'm going to leave him at the bottom of Great. I think the deck is still inherently very, very strong. And has some good matchups into like Teach and Nami. But also some pretty tricky matchups. Rebecca's a nice rogue deck. This is an underrated rogue deck. I'm going to put her above Jinbei and Rayleigh. One of my homies played this and went 6-3 at Wolverhampton in the TC. It's not an amazing deck by any means, but definitely worthy of being a rogue. I probably should have ranked this last time as well. Solid leader. Just should have better targets for this leader effect. It's only Kairos, bro. Fucking blue gilly. Needs some better 3-cost Dressrosa targets. Yellow Luffy can go in Solid. I don't have a lot to say on this leader. You're going to, again, struggle into Luna decks. But you can be nice and aggressive. The 5-cost Luffy is pretty good into Mihawk because they do like playing a lot of events. And you're naturally still quite strong into Enel. But yeah, this deck was already sort of falling off in last set in OP16. And I don't really have a lot of reason to think it will be significantly better in OP17. Red Ace I'm going to put in Solid. I think your Luffy matchup is actually quite tough because you don't get as much value out of the aggression as you would into other decks because they have so much extra counter, right? In addition to that, if they simply don't tap their units, you're not going to get the power down, which a lot of the time they don't tap in the early game. They also do play Luna and Strong, which can stun a lot of your early game. And Enel was already a pretty difficult matchup for this deck with them being able to remove so much of your stuff. But I do still think Ace has a lot of strengths. I underrated this deck a lot last set. I was not familiar with your game, but now I am, and it's a lot better than I expected. So I'm going to leave him in solid for now. Buggy's Rogue. It's a fine deck. We'll put him... the Imu's probably too high, to be honest here. Let's push Imu down. Yeah, I think Buggy's fine. It does what it does. It's very sort of one note. You play out a million prisoners. You're a fairly aggressive deck. Into Luffy, I can see that not being an amazing strategy, especially once they start playing the 7-cost Aura and going to 7k. Having like 3 or 4 Dons open, it's going to be very hard for you to pressure them. But the aggression, something like Mihawk, is pretty good. And being able to actually stick bodies into an L is always reasonable. So, I don't know. I don't think this deck's too powerful. But I'll leave him in Rogue for now. It's a fine deck. Sengoku as well. I think this is a fine deck. Maybe I'd push him up to bottom of solid. I'd probably put him above Dofi, actually. I'd put him about here. I do like this deck, naturally. It's very fun. If you haven't played Sengoku, I'd give him a go. Nami was one of your better matchups, though, so potentially a little bit worse than last set. And you do get stunned by Luna, / Strong. So I think with there being 2 more top green decks, maybe he'll be a little weaker. I don't know. I'm leaving him at the bottom of solid because I believe in the deck. I believe the deck is very powerful. And I'm also excited to see what the E-Show does if there is one in OP17. Because the Aramaki feels okay, but a little underwhelming. Usually Luffy is one of your worst matchups by far. You do not want to see this deck. Enel, I think, is very dice dependent. I don't have a ton of experience with these, but I can see Mihawk at least being... Power down's always good into Mihawk. Luffy being a 7k leader with all those Dons, though, is going to be very, very difficult to deal with. It was already a tricky matchup in this set if they saw their stuff, but now they're just a stronger deck with the boat. I can see you struggling into this. And maybe Mihawk, depending on how prevalent Luna ends up being in the lists. Your Teach matchup was fine. Your Teach matchup was quite good. So I think mixed bag of matchups, thus bottom of solid seems fine. Yamato I'd also put down here. I am not a believer in this deck anymore. I don't think I've lost to this deck a single time through all of OP16. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I might have lost to like one game. I don't know. I don't have a perfect memory. But I feel like I always beat this deck. I just feel like it's not very good. Maybe it's... I don't know. I don't know what it is. I just don't think... It's so one note. It's so bland. You do the same thing every game. Every turn, in fact. And what it's doing is decent. But I could only rank off my experience. And my experience is that this deck is not a very good deck. Red Purple Luffy, I'm going to put in Rogue. I've been seeing a little bit of success with him out of Asia. Be interested to see if how much the new stuff actually improves this deck versus it being like a flash in the pan. We'll find out. But I think top of Rogue is fine. The stage and the 7-cost Luffy are both very interesting for you, as well as a lot of the other red and purple Straw Hat stuff we've already had. Red Yellow Sabo is another one I've seen people doing the Straw Hat slop stuff with. I'm going to put him with either other shitty aggro decks. You have a bit of versatility in that you can heal pretty consistently, which is cool, but I just don't believe in this deck. Another problem this deck has is going to time, because it's so damn stally. But yeah, it's worthy of at least Rogue. Zonji as well, I'm going to put him at the top of Rogue. Saw someone won a, was it Krolzor? Might have been Krolzor. Won a Shinoz Cup with this. Correct me if it's not wasn't Krolzor, I can't remember. I think it's a flash in the pan. I don't believe in this deck. I think the Mihawk matchup's going to be very difficult. I think the Luffy matchup's going to be very difficult. I also just think the Enel matchup is going to be bad because they can remove all your stuff. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I just need to play this myself to find out. But my experience with this deck in the past while has been that it's not very good. And whilst I think the new additions are nice and the reduction in Nami is going to be nice, I'm just not a huge believer. Egghead Luffy's another fine yellow deck. I'll put him with Enel and Moria. If you want to play yellow, you could play Egghead Luffy, but I think you could do a lot better. And finally, Ace and Luffy. I'll put in solid. I enjoyed the build that we were playing last set. I think the Odin is interesting as an addition to that build, as sort of an alternative to the Green Bonnie. They both have upsides and downsides. The Green Bonnie giving you that Don back, sometimes let you do some cool plays. But the Odin stunning a guy gets you out of aggression, so, you know, you be the judge. I've also seen the Straw Hat Slop build with the 5-cost Sanji from the Luffy deck. Seems fine. It seems fine. I think it's worse, probably, than Sabo using that stuff. But, yeah, I mean, having a bunch of big Luffys on the board that your opponent can't clear is pretty cool. Although, again, you're going to get annihilated by Luna. Like, your entire board gets stunned. You don't play anything bigger than 7 costs, except maybe that one Newgate. That's just a totem that doesn't swing anyway. See, I don't know. I'm going to leave him in solid, but maybe could be a little lower. We'll see. That's just my initial impressions. Of course, this is probably not going to be 100% accurate. Look, it looks like Katakuri should be too high, but I don't think his matchups are that bad. I really don't. I think this deck's maybe, I don't know, maybe a little too high. Maybe Ace could be a little higher. Maybe this Ace could be a little higher. I don't know, but seeing so many different decks near the top is always great, man. This meta looks really exciting. There's so many strong leaders right now, and I'm really excited to dive more into this format. If there's anything you disagree with massively, if you think I'm wrong on anything, please do let me know. This is, again, just initial impressions. And once I've had more time to play with these decks, maybe it'll change. But honestly, I'm not going to have much time, because only 3 weeks until OP17 comes out. This is very much a flash-in-the-pan format. Thank you for watching. Shout out to Sleeve Chief for sponsoring this video. Check them out if you want to get some TCG accessories. Code Marine, 5% off. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.